So, this lecture is on globalization of intellectual property right. When we say globalization of intellectual property right, one question which comes in our mind is whether IPR intellectual property right previously, whether it was localized or it was it was one of the issue of the local concern. In this lecture we will find out that how intellectual property right today is completely different from the way intellectual property right was understood in the world before 200 years back. So, there is a phase wise development of intellectual property right, and as well as the different phases of globalization we have also noticed in last 200 years. So, this lecture will connect you that how more we are globalized, more we are also having the global setup of intellectual property rights today. So, the issue of globalization, when we say the globalization and interconnection of globalization with intellectual property rights, there are different topics which comes in our mind, and we are going to have a very short discussion on different issues. For example, the different phases of globalization, different phases of intellectual property rights, why globalization controversial today, what are the linkage between the globalization and intellectual property rights, what are the issues involved in globalized world related to intellectual property rights, the quest of ideas, the quest of innovation, intellectual property rights and developing economies, effects of globalization on intellectual property rights, future fears and way ahead. So, let me begin with the general meaning of globalization, because this particular lecture will try to connect globalization with IPR. So, when we say the process of globalization and its relationship with intellectual property rights, we must understand that the meaning of globalization. So, what is basically the meaning of globalization? As Jagdish Bhagwati pointed out, that it is the extension of capitalism throughout the world, and another economist Amartya Sen also made it very much clear that it has enriched the world scientifically, culturally, and benefited many people economically as well. So, the globalization is not only related to economic aspect, but it is also related to political, technological and cultural exchange of goods and services among the countries. So, it is integration of global economies. When we say global world, we are talking about the more integrated world today, more interdependent world today, and when we find that the goods and services are exchanged on a very fast scale, we say today that we are more globalized and more interconnected and interdependent. So, it is basically influencing the global economies today, because it influences the developed countries, multinational corporations, and this is a process driven by the technological change. So, more we are interconnected, it means that more we are connected with the information technology tools today, and it is more focused towards trade, investment and finance. So, when we say trade, when we say investment, in our previous lecture we have seen that intellectual property rights motivates us, or investors are motivated for the countries where IPR intellectual property rights are having more wider range of protection. So, when we say trade and IP intellectual property is interconnected, that is why the TRIPS agreement is more controversial and more debatable in the past few years, and even today there are various articles of TRIPS agreement which is debatable today, and we say today that intellectual property rights are being globalized, more globalized compared to last few decades. So, when we also see the phases of globalization, the first phase of globalization may be treated as the phase of 1970 to 1914. This was the phase when the European and Americans, as a result of tariff reduction and reduced transportation cost by the new technologies, especially the United States, benefited the most. World War I and Great Depression of 1930 again led to the practice of protectionism. In the second phase, trade liberalization, which started in many countries in 1945 to 1980, barriers in manufacturing goods were highly reduced among developed countries, and such exchange made them rich. But developing countries faced trade barriers with developed countries. Anti-trade policies and lack of investment and infrastructure continued. And the third phase, which is called the current phase of globalization, this phase led to the international capital movements at a very fast speed, increased multilateral trade agreements and labor intensive manufacturing trades, etc. So, in this phase we are finding today that we are having the outsourcing, foreign outsourcing. India is one of the, or Bangladesh and China are few economies which is well cited by Jagdish Bhagwati and other economists of the world, who has proved that there is a outsourcing of work from developed country to developing country. And by 2000 we are finding that information age through digitalization and international and internet started, and this particular phase is also named as the phase of reducing the distance, or many economists treat it as this particular phase as the phase of death of distance. So, these are the different phases of globalization. If we see the importance of globalization, we can really summarize this importance of globalization in 5 points, 6 points. One is the international trade. Globalization leads the international trade more on a very faster speed, cheap imports and less inflation, more competition today in the world in the field of manufacturing, in the field of services. We are finding that we are having more and more competition. Innovation and efficiency in production, as we have highlighted in our previous lecture, that intellectual property rights and innovations leads the new phase of efficiency and productivity. And we find today that globalized world is more focused for the new innovations and efficiency in the production. At the same time, we do find that the new ideas and new innovations and technologies are coming in the economic process, and that leads to the increased productivity and as well as the good standard of the life. So, this is the importance of globalization. Based on this background, we do highlight, we must highlight the controversies related to globalization. In one side, in one section of the economist who really supports the process of globalization in the name of trickle down, and they basically strongly supports this idea that globalization is going to help the people, it is going to help the efficiency in the economy, productivity of the economy, it is going to lead to the international trade at a very faster speed. But there are certain critical views which is also presented by Joseph Stiglitz and other economists, and they present their views in the sense that free trade is negatively affecting employment. They are not in the opinion that this globalized free trade is going to help us. So, entire process of globalization is named as the shifting of all savings and profits towards the developed countries such as the United States instead of developing countries, and thus such a term is treated as the Americanization. So, in one phase we see that globalization is the phase where most of the economies are getting benefit, where the Jagdish Bhagwati and other economists are trying to really fix their point that it is the process where other economies of the world is equally getting the benefit, but other part of the economist, other group of the economists, especially Joseph Stiglitz and other people, they are also talking about the shift of saving and profit towards developed countries, because the process is not the process where developing countries and least developed countries are enjoying the major benefits and profits of such process, and that is why this entire process is named as the Americanization process. With opening of the economies, new firms enter into the market, labor with inadequate education and training are forced to be unemployed, and domestic workers of a country face a stiff competition from a foreign workers. So, we are not really finding that all rosy picture of globalization, but we do find some of the challenges on the way of globalization, on the way of free trade, on the way of so called process of Americanization. And in this background, with this background, it is important to highlight the intellectual property rights and issues related to intellectual property rights and the different phases of intellectual property rights. So, intellectual property right is a component of global economy. We cannot say that intellectual property right can be continued without global integration and without global understanding and treaties. Today we are in the world where the IPR is well connected with the global treaties, and in this current phase of globalization of the intellectual property rights, it has become a pillar for any business organization along with technology, marketing, sales and manufacturing. A firm cannot really come out with a product without having their intellectual property, and whether it is a product related to the medicine or pharmaceutical sector, or the food item, or a printing item, whether it is a music device or electronic device. In any sector you are not free, a firm is not free from protecting the intellectual value involved in the production of those materials. So, in such a well framed intellectual property rights system, IPR protection in a country can lead to the high inward technology transfer, leading to the higher production. It is also related to the trade, as we have already mentioned in our past lecture. So, intellectual property is divided today into different parts. As one of the traditional division we have already seen in our previous lecture, that it includes the functional commercial innovations like patents and trademarks, and the second is the artistic and literary property, which includes cultural creations like films, books, poems, etc. So, we do find here that there are different phases of intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights are primarily related with protecting the rights of the domestic authors and inventions within the country's border. So, the Republic of Florence issued first protected authors' rights to a famous architect named Filippo on 9th June 1421. The basis of the first lasting patent institution of intellectual property protection is found in 1474, a statute of Venetian Republic. The 14-year monopolies of IPR was granted by the English Statute of Monopolies in 1624. The first statute of modern copyright was given to the Statute of Anne in 1710, and the United States lead in imposing a strong intellectual property rights regime on the global trading system. So, there are international base. A British author named Charles Dickens petitioned the US Congress in 1836 for protecting of non-US authors due to the wholesale piracy of the English publishing industry. So, meanwhile, for mutual protection of intellectual property rights, the Berne Convention in 1886 and the Paris Convention in 1883 took place. During 20th century, patents were regarded as monopolies rather than incentives for innovations, and were denigrated in the United States. So this particular phases, we find that intellectual property rights has a new shift from being viewed this as the local level to being viewed today as one of the phase of the global level. So, the strong mutually harmonized intellectual property rights were introduced, dominated by the United States. America recognized the significance of knowledge and innovations. In 1886, Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuits solved the case of Polaroid versus Kodak infringement of its patented instant photography technology. After this, American government strictly reformed the IP policy reform. Post Uruguay round 1986 to 1994, agreement on trade related aspect of intellectual property rights TRIPS started on 1st January 1995, which established minimum standard for protection of intellectual property for all WTO members. So, the TRIPS agreement was challenged due to its negative consequences for the poor economies, and for many years the discussion was continued. As you can see here, from 1986 to 1994, world had a huge discussion on accepting the Uruguay round agreement on trade related intellectual property rights, and many developing countries were really upset and they were protesting against this. So, we find here that like the different phases of globalization, we have also seen the different phases of intellectual property rights, and when we connect this globalization and intellectual property right, today knowledge has transformed into the wealth. Knowledge is flowing highly in trade and industry. One cannot really continue with a big brand without having the big base of knowledge and R&D, and so the TRIPS covers all dimensions of intellectual property, and today we find that the trade which was not really the topic for many intellectual property rights issues, today it is important for many aspects of intellectual property rights. Varieties of intellectual property rights are added with trade, and especially Doha Round 2001 raised concern of intellectual property rights in public health. With increase in globalization, number of standards in copyright law and patents have increased. Pharmaceuticals and audiovisual industries are mostly affected by patents and copyright. Many sectors are still not influenced by intellectual property right regimes, and trade and intellectual property rights have an indirect relationship. Trade liberalization has mutual benefits where extension of intellectual property protection in poor countries shifts income of rich countries to poor countries without increasing world welfare. So, knowledge is a key to international competitiveness and magic of the marketplace. This is the argument by the Duffields, which tells that wealth creating knowledge comes from universities and audio video industry. So, poor countries should adopt a standard of United States and European style of IP protection. So, we find that in the new phase of intellectual property rights, the concern for protection of intellectual property rights is slowly becoming more strong compared to the past, and the world is becoming more and more sincere about the protection of intellectual property right because of the linkage of intellectual property right with the trade and investment. So, we are currently in a new platform of globalization where we have to have more and more concern for the intellectual property rights. So, there are certain issues related to patent. A long patent life raises the rate of discoveries, but reduces the social benefits of each discovery. It is true that if you have longer patent life, it is basically rising the rate of discoveries, but it reducing the social benefits of each discovery because a person who is having the ownership of that patented item, they will continue their monopoly for many years. So, patent protection promotes domestic innovation and flow of ideas through higher FDI and export. As we have mentioned at many times that international trade and patent has a direct relationship today. A country which has more patentability and more potential to patent the items, they are getting more FDI today, and they have the potential to have more and more export. In complex technologies, patent protection may inhibit innovations, but if you have complex technologies adopted in the domestic economies, patent protection may be inhibit. At the same time, patents in developing countries is complex because developing countries are still fighting for more and more technological know-how and more upgradation in the technology, so that acquiring the patent rights and protecting the patent rights both are one of the challenging issue for them. Especially in pharmaceutical industry, extension of IPR may lead to more research in drugs, but low purchasing power and lack of commercial interest of pharmaceutical companies lead to less research. For example, the drug case India-US example, the US dominance in drug patents hurts almost everyone. High pricing power is major issue, especially in pharmaceutical industry. So, the US 2015 special 301 report and annual review of IPR protection and enforcement kept 37 countries out of its 32 trading partners in priority watch list, and it kept India in priority watch list of offenders. The report aims to increase bilateral engagement on intellectual property rights, and it provides benefits to innovative and creative industries. So, global IPR issues and the challenges for HIV and AIDS, debate on intellectual property and incentives for innovation continues. In 2004, 3.1 million people died due to this disease, more than any other infectious disease. Progress in vaccine development is still inadequate, and affordability, availability and research are less in drugs. One of the global IPR issues which is related to the traditional knowledge, IPR tries to protect the traditional knowledge, also called poor people's knowledge. Developing countries not only benefit from ideas of developed countries, but also from their own indigenous knowledge. So, enhancing commercial value of traditional knowledge is important. For example, Banarsi Sari, Madhubani painting of India. Indigenous people have their own intellectual property. The quest for ideas are public goods, non-excludable and non-rival. For more detail, you can find out the meaning of public goods and what are the merits of these public goods. So, but the nature of these goods, ideas, are just like non-excludable and non-rival. IPR owns, sells and regulates intellectual property rights, can be owned, it can be sold out, and it can be regulated through the ideas. To achieve efficiency, ideas should be protected and available for sale like a commodity. So, crowding out of ideas and culture by global brands such as McDonald's, Coke can be seen in traditional or local products. This shows Western domination in consumption. Poor countries have equity issues due to the deprivation in education, health and information. So, ideas created at universities are not covered fully by the patent system. Stiglitz pointed out that whatever ideas we are creating at the universities level, it is not fully patented. So, the quest for innovation major quest is whether to become a knowledge based economy or knowledge protected economy. On the other hand, some knowledge over protected industries have been continuously dominating in market with different intellectual property rights. This makes poor countries incapable to see life saving drugs, etc. Thus, it must be kept that innovation is continuous, dynamic and wider range in respect to IPR along with higher investment in it. So, if we see the issues related to intellectual property rights in developing economies, developing countries are in favor of innovation and research in drugs, geographical indications which is benefiting its commercialization of the products, it benefits to the indigenous people. They are developing countries are in favor of IPR benefits to the indigenous people, knowledge creation, increase in FDI and the protection of design industries and software industries. But they are against the price rise of the drugs and the loss of farmers through privatization of genetic material and the chances of piracy of traditional knowledge and the increase in licensing cost. So, the effects of globalization on intellectual property right, if somebody wants to really summarize what are the effects of globalization on IPR, it is the liberation of information and increase in productivity, commodification of information in digital world due to the creation of favorable and trans-border environment, and efficiency, innovation and technology diffusion. It has led to the profound transformations in reduction of state sovereignty as minimum standard of protection are set under transnational intellectual property rights. Traditional and political objectives of sovereignty are reduced today. So people are asking this question that are we really losing the national sentiment or the nationality in the name of globalization. So intellectual property rights today is not not local in nature today, it is more global in nature today. So when we say intellectual property rights of a particular firm, it is not only for that particular firm at the local market or the domestic market, but it is for the international market. So there is a fear for many developing countries today that developing countries are less intended in developing intellectual property, where developed countries are not interested to invest in IP in poor countries. So strong patents and copyrights will create problems for low developed countries, and superior competition may occur with intellectual property, in which competition for innovations displaces existing monopolies by new firms. So this is the future fear, and what are the way ahead? Intellectual property protection in a country can definitely lead to the high inward technology transfer, leading to the higher production. Instead of restricting others to adopt the know-how already adopted, focus should be on creating new technology and creativity in intellectual property rights. Some of the newly emerging economies like Singapore, Korea, they are adopting such policy, and demonstration policy knowledge for developing economies in infrastructure, human resources may be adopted. And we see today that since we are in a more globalized world today, intellectual property right needs to create sustainability in globalized system of intellectual property, and without having a proper sustainable model, we cannot really ensure that the firms or the country or the economy will really survive in the global cutthroat competition, where the many firms and many economies are trying their best to protect the intellectual property rights. With this note, you can also have a reading of these materials, some of the books and some of the online sources. I think this lecture will help you to understand how intellectual property is globalized today. Thank you.